But myself, along with the Social Democrats, will be very enthusiastically supporting this bill. I'll be doing so on a number of fronts. I am a representative of the constituency. I grew up in the North Inner City. I am the son of a Dublin street trader, albeit a Henry Street one and not a Moore Street one, and there is a difference. I want to commend Sinn Féin for bringing forward the bill, and I want to commend Deputy O'Snuddy not only for bringing forward the bill today, but for the work that he's carried out over the last decades in terms of preserving the revolutionary history and advocating for it in his role both as a TD and as an activist. For me, Moore Street represents something extraordinary in this city. We talked already about the fact that Dublin, if you hear the old voice of Ireland, will probably be what you hear on Moore Street today. But actually, for me, it's a little bit different. Moore Street represents a fusion of old Dublin, old Ireland, and the new Ireland, where the street traders who for generations have carried out their trade there have now mixed with the new communities of that have joined and enhanced us over the many years, over the last number of decades. And I think that's what, in terms of what Moore Street represents today, it's absolutely underloved from the perspective of the state and from the City Council. But what has emerged is something really interesting, a fusion of new communities and old communities just getting on and supporting each other. And we will absolutely be supporting and preserving the history of that site. We won't be doing so too. We also want to acknowledge what it is today. One of the parts of this bill that does excite me, and I think it's a fantastic bill, I really do. We're reading it yesterday and going through it. I thought it was a fantastic bill. I really like the fact that it also acknowledged the work that the current Minister for Housing done previously and holding him to account for the words that he's made. I think we should always be held for words we make in opposition and say, well, actually, if you said in opposition, we'd also like you to implement it. Will you have the opportunity to do so? But one of the aspects of it for me that I found exciting was that it laid out a vision for the city. I laid out a vision for an important part of the city that's in decline. And I spent 6 years on the City Council and I've very rarely seen that level of ambition. There is a conversation that was already emerging pre-COVID but has been accelerated since. And that is, what will our city centre, what will the city centre of our capital city be over the next 5 years, over the next decade? And I'll tell you what it won't be. We won't be a place where it will just be shopping centres and shops and all of those things that we invested in over the last number of years, where we gave over ourselves to kind of consumerism and capitalism, because that was already in decline. Long before COVID, the city centre was losing commercial footfall to the M50 shopping centres. People were already starting to shop online. And what that will mean is that if we want to seek an enhancement of what our capital city will be, we have to look somewhere different. And the answer is very, very obvious. We look to our culture, we look to our history, we look to the presentation of ourselves, all the things that we present to the world of what it means to be Irish, and when we invite people here, they're the very things that will save us here. So this cultural quarter will be part of that. As was already demonstrated, that can also be connected to the Parnell Street developments. We look around the city, Crow Park is a stone's throw away, the Abbey Theatre. All of these kind of really important cultural components of our city are contained within a very short space. And if the City Council aren't going to do it, actually I do think there is a responsibility for Parliament to step in here and protect. I'm very conscious that when we speak about the history, or a revolutionary history, that it is complex. And I seek not to lecture anybody on the histories of this country, because there's so many people in this chamber and around who understand it and know it better than I do. But it is a complex history, and we talk about our revolutionary past. We shouldn't only seek to talk about the parts where we are valiant, or where we stood in opposition to the British. We should also acknowledge that it's difficult too. And we shouldn't shy away from those. So as we're protecting these battlefield sites, let's also acknowledge the kind of a more thorough societal history around them. When I learned, you cannot help when you learn about the history of 1960 and to be in awe of the sacrifice, to be in awe of the courage, to be in awe of the bravery. I remember being in school and hearing that actually when the rebels were being led out, that there was some people who were throwing fruit at them because they didn't support them at the time. And that fascinated me. I couldn't understand why that would happen. And then through kind of, as you develop and take a broader interest in your history, and through historians such as Miles Dungan, you hear about that these were actually separation women, women whose husbands had been locked out during the period of 1913 and the Great Lockout of 1913, and had to go off and fight in World War I, and they were absolutely terrified of what that moment would mean for them and the loss of their income, and that would probably lead to them facing hunger, or their husbands on the front line and wherever they may be facing further victimisation than they already were. And it's just complex little histories and narratives of that I also think are really important when we talk about a revolutionary past. Talking about the communities around the civilian deaths from the bombings and from the gunshots, they're also really important. Talking about the revolutionary parts of our history that didn't only start in 1916, but certainly accelerated from then on, moving into the War of Independence. Well, a document for me, well, I absolutely love the majesty of the Proclamation of Independence that's presented in 1916. The document for me that stands out during that revolutionary period is the Democratic Programme of 1919, that for the first time enshrined civic and economic rights. And then that moved on into the counter-revolution, where that document was described as being largely poetry, and that moved on into, well, actually before that, the Civil War, which we really haven't discussed in any great detail in terms of what that will mean for us. And that will be another complex conversation that we have to have over the next couple of years. But all of those histories, both the good and the bad, need to be captured as we preserve these battlefield sites. I think it's massively important that we do so, and we'll probably. And the most ultimate question is, what did independence mean for the average person on the street? And as we engage in that, that is going to incorporate conversations about how we handed over our control to church control and all of the hideous things that came from that, including Magdalene laundry institutions, asylums. All of those things must be contained when we have a true narrative of our history. I do want to talk about what Moore Street and the market represents today. And there's a vital role of one particular group that isn't really, and it's not an omission, and truly it's something that we can include in the document. But the very reason that Moore Street, there is actually still a market even in operation in Moore Street today, or when we open them back up, is because of the role the new communities have played in terms of preserving them. I know in the Housing Minister's document a couple of years ago that's also contained here, would be no more commercial development on the site, and I absolutely understand what you were referring to in the case of kind of large multinational shopping centres coming in, but actually the commercial development that has happened over there over the last decade has been those that have been taken on by our new communities in terms of opening up small little shops, bringing new types of vegetables onto the street that we probably hadn't seen previously in Ireland, and actually merging that with the old and the new, and that contribution from those new communities equally needs to be protected. If there is a vision for Moore Street that requires a new and beautiful market, those communities absolutely need to be central to that. And the idea of a market is very, very important. When we're actually bringing people into the city, it won't be for shopping centres, I promise you that. In the future, shopping centres are well catered for all over the M50, and that's where people will drive to. But when we're bringing people into the city, it will be to issues like the market. And that market has, as laid out in this proposal by Sinn Féin, has the potential to be really, really vibrant, something very different, something that you would come into the city because it's an experience. But when we do it, we need to work with traders to diversify their stock. We need to include the fusion of new communities and their cultures that cater along that street also. And I think if we get that right, capturing that history, capturing that contemporary aspect of the street, well, all of a sudden there's a vision for this city that is exciting and that hasn't existed before. There is a dark, I don't want to say a dark shadow, sounds more sinister than I actually mean it to be, but actually one of the conversations that we haven't had at the moment is the actual failure of the City Council and Dublin City Council to present and preserve and enhance these important streets within our capital city, such as probably most prominently Moore Street. And that is a failure of leadership, and we need to discuss why that failure of leadership continues to happen. And I don't think under its current auspices, and that's no reflection of the councillors who do astounding work with very limited power. It's a reflection of the structure of how we give power over to unelected bureaucrats who don't ever have to lay out a vision or be held accountable for it. And I think that is one aspect of that has left streets like Moore Street in decline. So I will commend Sinn Féin for bringing this bill to the Parliament. We will absolutely be supporting it. We welcome the fact that the government won't be opposing it, and we hope to continue to be partaking in the discussions as it develops right the way through, because this is an exciting vision for the city that will help us better understand ourselves and better project ourselves on not only nationally but onto the global stage. This is the vision of Ireland that will bring people here and help protect their city. Cúra maith go